All right. Excellent. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us on this Friday morning, um, our day before Valentine's Day. Happy Galentine's Day to all who
Celebrate.
celebrate.
Happy Friday
Um,
the 13th to all who
oh
celebrate that as
yeah,
well. We're
it's a
getting
double
two in a row
whammy.
this year.
Wow, lucky us. Let's say that they're going to be lucky because I feel like we've had a rough enough year.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, it is wonderful to be here with you all this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the very first session of the 2026 Prevention Skill Builder series, and today's topic is classroom management skills and resources for school-based prevention. We are really happy to be here with you all this morning. Um, and we'll go ahead and jump right in. Oh, if my
So,
slides want to cooperate. So, a couple of quick notes before we get into the training. So please feel free to use the chat today to introduce yourself, to let us know where you're calling in from, your organization, or what part of the state you're in. Um, this is a 90-minute session and we do not have a scheduled break. So if you need to step away or to take a break, please take care of you as needed. Um, as we mentioned before, this training will be recorded and the slides and all the other materials that we mentioned will be shared with you all after the fact. So don't stress about writing everything down. And also for that reason, we aren't admitting AI note takers into the session since we'll share out all the materials afterward. And lastly, if you have questions at any point, please feel free to drop them in the chat or come off of mute. We will have um, some discussion times available, but also your questions are important. So please make sure that you are getting what you need out of this session. Thank you. I love seeing folks introducing themselves in the chat. So let me and Becca take a second to introduce ourselves. So I'm Kiki Saragnis. I am the Director of Prevention and Outreach at the Missouri Network Against Child Abuse. I use she and her pronouns. I am calling in to you all this morning from Kansas City, Missouri. And I no longer spend much of my time in the classroom, but I have clocked a lot of hours in there and started my career working with kids. And so I'm really excited to get to share um, these lessons learned, the fun way and the hard way with you all today. Becca, feel free to jump in.
sure. My name is Becca Anderson. I am one of the coordinators of youth programs at the Metropolitan organization Countering Sexual Assault in Kansas City, Missouri. Yeah, I started out thinking I wanted to work with college kids, ended up working a lot with elementary, middle, and high school kids. So I've got experience in the classroom, just like Kiki. Some lessons learned the hard way, some lessons felt natural to me. So excited to share with you all.
Yeah. Excellent, excellent. Thank you all for everyone who's introducing themselves and saying hi and good morning in the chat. We appreciate it. It's fun seeing some familiar faces and names, and it's really fun meeting some new folks too. So thank you all for being here. All right. So before we get into all the training material, we want to learn a little bit more about the work that you all do with students and in the classroom. So I am going to open up a really quick little poll for us, and Becca is going to walk us through some of these quick questions.
Yeah, so the first question is, which age groups do you work with? Are you with early childhood or preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, young adults, or other? And you can always drop in the chat your response to that other so we can have a sense if there's other groups people work with. And you can select all that apply. Because I know at first when I was looking at it, I was like, whoa, what would I pick? But yeah,
Yeah.
you can pick multiple. And
Oh, and
it,
then while
okay,
folks are
all three
voting,
questions popped up at the
yeah,
same time. Got
yeah,
it.
sorry about that.
I didn't know if that was a co-host thing. Got it. Okay. So what, and then next we have what disruptive behaviors do you see in the classroom most often? We tried to think of the greatest hits. Um, so we've got talking out of turn or over others, side conversations, fidgeting, excessive movement, not following instructions, physical and or verbal aggression, victim blaming, inappropriate comments, and then that other again, you can write in the chat. And then for the third one, which disruptive behavior do you find most challenging personally? I know Kiki and I have talked before about the beauty of having a co-host is a lot of times different things irritate you the most. So a student that drives one of you crazy might be kind of funny to the other one, which helps with managing. Um, okay, got some people chiming in the chat with where they're at.
Seeing people voting, thank you so much. Feel free to keep voting and feel free to keep
Yeah.
adding your notes in the chat as well. I see in the chat Shanita said all of the above. Yep,
That
that's
might be
real.
all of the above for the first question,
Oh, I was
but
thinking for
sometimes it's
what
hard to
gets under your
decide.
skin.
It's hard to decide what drives you the most nuts. And some of it
Sure.
you may not realize until we get into scenarios, which is fine too. We'll have
All
to
right.
talk about all of them. Um,
All right, last call for the poll. I'm gonna wrap it up and then we can kind of look at the responses really quickly and just see what folks who folks are working with and what behaviors they're encountering. That'll help us inform some of our conversations a little bit.
so
All
Kelsey, you're
right.
able to end the poll too.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So it looks like we have um,
A lot
folks
of
are
elementary.
a lot of early childhood, pre-K and elementary, some middle school, a little bit less working with high school, a little bit less working with young adults, and then some folks said other, and I saw in the chat all of the above, so I imagine folks are working with every age group. Um, Behaviors that we see in the classroom, a lot of us are running into talking out of turn, side conversations, fidgeting, and distracting movement, not following instructions, physical or verbal aggression, and inappropriate comments. And then as far as the ones that we find most challenging, we had a pretty good spread here. So some folks said talking out of turn. We had a couple people who said side conversations, moving around, not following instructions. And then so a couple folks also said verbal and physical aggression. All right, I'm going to close these up. Thank you all so much um, for sharing your wisdom and your experiences in here. Um,
That can also help us
absolutely.
as we move forward, making sure we're not spending too much time on the things that people maybe aren't seeing as much. I was glad to see people weren't saying victim blaming, although since less people are working with high schoolers, I feel like that's where a lot of that stuff can come out. But I
Mhm.
perhaps should not assume. Maybe we're
Sure.
just doing a great job changing the culture.
Yes. Kudos to all of us. All right, so let's talk a little bit about where some of these disruptive and challenging behaviors come from. So, I'm about to tell you something that you've probably heard a million times, and maybe you're like me and you say this enough that you feel like you're a broken record. But especially when we're working, I mean, with everyone, but especially when we're working with children and young people, behavior is communication. A lot of the time, the things that we're seeing, the actions, the behaviors that we're seeing are communicating unmet needs, communicating discomfort or challenging feelings. They're communicating a lot of things to us that those young people may not have the words or the comfort level to say to us, right? And so, we are going to talk about a tool that I think is really handy. Becca and I have both used, and this is a tool that was created by a really great organization called Learning for Justice, formerly known as Teaching Tolerance. And so their tool is designed primarily for classroom teachers, but so much of these resources are really adaptable and applicable to the work that we do with school-based prevention. So they use this great acronym called EATS to explain where a lot of these disruptive behaviors are coming from. So we're going to break it down piece by piece. So the E in eats is escape. A lot of the time, some of these behaviors are a way for a student to avoid or try to remove themselves from a task, a situation, or a feeling that they are finding uncomfortable or difficult or aversive for some reason, right? So the example in here, during a conversation about victimization, Jordan keeps making comments about how weird it is that we're talking about this and that this is a waste of time, right? On the surface level, we might think this student is not engaging. They are minimizing the importance of this issue. It's very possible that Jordan is really uncomfortable. It's very possible that Jordan has been victimized, right? And that they are expressing discomfort because maybe this is bringing up some really difficult feelings or emotions or body sensations for them. And so they are trying to distance themselves from that material. Sometimes we see this with students intentionally doing behaviors to get removed from class as well, right? Or to get removed from a situation or from another group of students. So the A in eats focuses on attention, right? And before we dig too much into attention, I just want to name that I think culturally, a lot of the time, the word attention or the idea of seeking or wanting attention gets a really bad rap. Um, and, I think all of us have probably heard people say, or even said ourselves, right? And this is no judgment to anyone who may have found themselves saying this, is, oh, they just want attention. And when we think about it, when you pull that thread a little bit further, of course they do. Everybody needs attention. We're social creatures, and children especially need attention, and they'll seek it out in less constructive ways when they aren't getting the kind of positive attention that they need and that they crave. So attention might look like trying to either gain or avoid attention from peers or from adults. That could be positive attention, like praise. That could also be negative attention, right? I'm sure all of us, whether we're working with children, whether we're caregivers to children, know that sometimes kids will do things that push your buttons on purpose to get attention, right? Or to get a reaction or to get you to continue engaging. Yes, Sherry, yes. Sherry wrote in the chat, we try to say that they're connection seeking instead of attention seeking. And that really changes our mindset when working with the child. Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think when we reframe attention and look at it as connection, it also makes it a lot easier for us to feel compassion for the person who is seeking out that connection. We all want connection. Um, and so that's also what that note on here is, right? It says needing or seeking attention is not inherently negative or a maladaptive behavior. It just is. We all need connection and attention. So the example on here is Sky keeps interrupting other students and the presenter to make jokes and get others to laugh. This could also be a situation where Sky's uncomfortable with the material. This could also be a situation where, for whatever reason, whatever else is going on for this student, they need a little extra love and attention that day. It could have a lot to do with the material that you're talking about. It could have nothing to do with the material that you're talking about. All right, let's talk about T, tangible needs. So tangible needs refers to gaining access to a preferred activity or object, right? I know a lot of you all in the poll mentioned that you work with elementary and pre-K kids. So you probably see this a lot, right? So our example is Jack really wants to sit in the beanbag chair in class, even though it's Ollie's day to use it. So Jack keeps telling the teacher, kind of tattling on Ollie to try to get Ollie in trouble so that Ollie's not in the beanbag and Jack can get access to the beanbag, right? You might see this in a lot of ways. The tangible need might be a snack. It might be a special, a toy or an object. It could be, a special chair or seating, in the classroom. It could be fidgets. It could be the sensory corner. It could, whatever it is, a student who is maybe being disruptive in order to try to get access to that. We also know that as adults, a lot of the time, our instinct is not to say, hey, you are tattling on your classmate or your friend. You are being distracting to this other person. Let me reward that with giving you the beanbag or whatever it is. Um, and and so even though it feels counterproductive for us a lot, they're trying everything that they can to get access to that thing. Oh my gosh, Rebecca wrote in the chat, or the movie they were watching when you entered the classroom. I once interrupted a viewing of Ratatouille to talk about child sexual abuse. Obviously, one of those is probably more fun for the students than the other. So they're going to want to get back to the movie as fast as they possibly can, which is going to be challenging for you as the facilitator. It's also really, I got lots of feedback about that on the survey. And see, some of these things are challenging because that's outside of your control. I'm sure that if you asked, they would not, you would not have said, yeah, I would love to come in the middle of movie time and interrupt it to talk about something that the students might find stressful or upsetting, right? The same way that we often don't want to go, like when you find out you're presenting right before lunch or recess, you kind of automatically are like, okay, they're going to be antsy. They're going to like they're ready to go to this thing and I'm the one standing between them. The same way like if you're at a conference, that last session before lunch, everyone's kind of like do. They're ready to go. All right. So that actually brings us really well. Oh my gosh. Sierra said one time I presented right after the Harlem Wizards. Let's just say I killed the vibe. That's real. So I love this. We've all been in these spots. So we're going to hit S really quick. S being sensory needs. So this actually, I think, rolls in really well to what we were just talking about. So sensory needs could be a student trying to meet an internal need that is, possibly difficult for us to detect from the outside, right? They're not regulated. They need to move their bodies. Maybe they're stimming. We don't necessarily know from looking at them that they need to do that, right? The same way that we wouldn't know from looking at them that they need to go to the bathroom unless they're doing the potty dance. But they're having an uncomfortable feeling or they're seeking a different sensation in their body that is encouraging them to do some other kind of movement or behavior. Right. So this one I probably is really common, something that we run into a lot. Casey keeps leaning the chair back and moving around at their desk, despite being reminded to keep their chair on the floor. Right. We're seeing like, okay, you guys, we know to keep our chairs on the floor. It's not safe. Somebody could get hurt. And what they're saying is, my body feels better when I'm moving it this way, right? They might not have the words to tell us that directly, but if they keep doing it, we can probably tell they like that sensation in their body or something, or they need some kind of movement. They're getting tired, they're getting antsy, so there is some kind of unmet need there. So, so let's look at some of these disruptive behaviors that we talked about and kind of pulled about earlier. And I'm curious, feel free to come off of mute and share or write in the chat and share. Um, some of these behaviors that we talked about earlier, what do you think these behaviors could be communicating, or what might be an unmet need behind or underneath these behaviors?
And we'll go through together behavior by behavior to break it down. But if there's any of these that maybe feel obvious.
Yeah. Or they're like, aha, I just made this link. Okay. You guys are ready to get
Early on a
into it.
Friday.
Yeah, let's just say that too. Oh,
Mm.
Justice, thank you. Justice said, oh, now the chat is blowing up. See, we just
Turns
needed
out
to
we
give you
just
guys
needed to
another
let people
second to
type.
type. Not feeling seen or heard at home, trying to seek connection in the classroom to make up for it. Yes, and that is such an empathetic way, like reframe, right? Um, talking out of turn over others. Hear me, I need to be heard. Yes, yes. I work with preschoolers, and often when the classroom is calm, they feel uncomfortable because they are used to chaos. Yeah, they want to be running around and making noise. They're like, why is it so quiet in here? What is happening? Do I have to take a nap? I don't want to do that. Um, Attention seeking or connection seeking. Yeah, I see. Oh, yes, I see Brittany and Shanita are on the same page. They both said uncomfortable with the material, right? Absolutely. You guys are on the same wavelength. Yes. So there are lots of things that could be being communicated, right? We just borrowed straight from Eats to give examples, right? Talking out of turn or over others. I think someone mentioned this in the chat, looking for attention, right? They're not feeling heard. Um, Sometimes this happens to all of us too. You get excited and you want to participate, right? And your mouth moves faster than your hand can go up, right? And you want to be a part of the conversation. Side conversation, this could be escape. I'm uncomfortable with the material, right? So instead of engaging in this, I'm going to go over here and talk to my friend about what I want to do at lunch or what show I watched last night or whatever. Fidgeting, getting out of their seats or other excessive movement absolutely could be sensory needs. It could look like escape. They might actually want to leave the space, right? A lot of times this is a sensory thing. Um, Not following instructions could be sensory needs, right? That could be like, ooh, I'm taking in way too much information and my brain isn't processing it yet. So I didn't do what you asked me to do because I didn't get to process that information yet. I need to hear it in a different way or see it in a different way. It could also look like needing attention, right? Okay, everybody sit down and do this. Okay, well, I have an unmet connection need here. So I'm going to be over here doing something else until I get your attention, right? And you come talk to me or something like that. Physical or verbal aggression. This could look like arguing. This could look like kind of picking fights or pushing people's buttons on purpose. A lot of times this can be escape, wanting to be removed from a situation or wanting the other person to be removed from the situation. It could also be attention, right? I'm not getting any positive attention, but I know if I do this, I'm definitely going to get some attention, whether it's positive or not. Victim blaming or comments. A lot of times that can be escape because folks are uncomfortable. It could also look like a need of distancing themselves from like a victim identity. And similar with inappropriate comments, it could be escape, it could be attention, it could be tangible needs. It definitely depends on the situation and what they're saying. So we're going to pull the thread on these a little bit. Oh, let me just check in all the chat. I see a couple more notes too. A lot of the times, at least for me, the students acting out may be the ones who are actually being or have been abused. This actually happened to me yesterday. After the presentation, he disclosed to the counselor. I have been in that exact same situation where like, man, this kid is really disrupting this presentation. And then at the end, they say that happened to me, and you're like, oh, I I see you. Yeah. I had a teacher call me last night about a kiddo that's been running around the school and outside the school knocking things over, not listening, etc. She said it feels like he's in constant fight or flight. Whew. I thought that was a great way to connect the behavior with the psych. Yeah, with the psychology. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oof. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Becca now to talk a little bit about um, how or what kind of values we as prevention educators bring into the classroom with us.
Thanks, Kelsey. So, when we think about the values that we bring into the classroom, baseline, we're caring about safety and wanting to empower students to speak up. So, it's important that we model the behaviors. So, we want to foster that psychological safety and practice the same skills we want students to adopt. There's those moments in a school day where you're like, none of you are listening to me. Why am I having to do everything? And you're like, I suppose I am the adult. Um, so when we think about shared prevention values, this was a list that Kiki and I brainstormed. We thought about physical and psychological safety. So knowing that we aren't going to physically harm the students or psychologically harm them. A lot of times, I know data is mixed on whether trigger warnings are helpful, but just letting them know this can be a tough topic. I'm not going to be giving graphic descriptions, but take care of yourself as you need to, normalizing, like if you need to get a drink, taking care of yourself, that kind of stuff. Empathy, so considering where they might be coming from, which I feel like is the TLDR of this whole session. Just thinking about the fact that we may find behaviors frustrating, but it's helpful for us to pause and think about what may be behind that. Empowerment. We want to give the students a voice. Something I was thinking of when somebody was saying in the chat about wanting to be heard. It makes me think about groups of students that I have worked with that it's clear in a conversation that other kids in the class maybe don't care for the student or find them annoying or something just by the way they react when the student speaks up. But the student is so passionate about the stuff that we're talking about that can be an opportunity for them to be heard and feel empowered and just feel seen in a way maybe they don't get to feel seen every day by their peers or maybe even by their teachers. Collaboration. So, wanting to make sure that our sessions aren't just us talking at the students, but also hearing their input whenever possible, without, of course, veering completely off course, which we'll talk about. Respect and dignity. So, respecting all of the students in the room and recognizing that each of them deserve to feel safe, comfortable, and be fully themselves in the classroom, which goes along with inclusion. So, knowing that everybody is different and this space isn't just for one certain kind of learner, this space isn't just for students who have particular experiences. We want to be approaching all of the students in a learning mindset. And next, thinking about how we might unintentionally undermine our prevention values. So these are things I don't think any practitioner is ever doing intentionally. A lot of times it's a symptom of burnout, whether it's like burnout over a long period or it is a long day. And for some reason, the kids have been bananas. Uh, we might unintentionally undermine those values, which makes the behaviors more challenging. So it can kind of be a vicious cycle. So, some of the things we might say, and you may not have said these verbatim, but I guess some of them aren't even phrases, but engaging in power struggles. So long ago, Kiki and I had a boss that said in a meeting, if you are arguing with a student, you've already lost. I was a high school debater. I love arguing. And I remember when I realized that that was counterproductive, it blew my mind. I know the way that it was explained to me in a training was thinking about if you have like a character that you don't like on a show or an ending on a show that you didn't like, and somebody chimes in and is like, actually, I really like that character. For me, maybe an unpopular opinion. I don't like April Ludgate in Parks and Rec. And one time I was talking to somebody about it. She started defending April Ludgate. And for some reason, it set me ablaze. And I was like digging in and I was like, she has no redeeming qualities. It's just not productive. And it can escalate things. So it can be a missed opportunity to be curious or empower students. It undermines your presence as a steady, dependable adult, which is a key protective factor against childhood adversity. And it undermines your own resilience and makes you feel worse. Even if you're like, what would really feel good is letting this kid know they're wrong. It turns out it doesn't work that way a lot of the time. Um, Next, minimizing students' value, which when you read that, it's like, ooh, gosh, that's heavy. But saying things like, I'm not a babysitter. This isn't my job. I get paid regardless. I remember my high school choir teacher used to stand there silently stewing at us and looking at his watch. And then he would say, you just wasted 60 seconds of my time. And I was always like, oh, it just made us all more irritated. And it communicates that your time is more valuable than theirs, communicates that you are not invested in the outcome of the interaction, because it's not just we want to just say things to them, they absorb it, and then we waltz into the hallway. We want to really help engage with them. Because something that I always think about when students are asking questions that might feel uncomfortable or tough, or I'm like, woof, do you really think that? I always say it's good that they felt comfortable asking that question with me in the room than leaving the room and being like, Becca's an idiot. She didn't even consider this perspective. So I try to always be in that mindset that I'm welcoming them asking me questions because I want them to feel safe doing so. Next, assuming you know their intentions. So a lot of times we can personalize student behavior or think they like that student reminds me of somebody that I didn't like in high school. I should maybe stop leaning so hard on high school because I know a lot of us don't work with high schoolers, but assuming that they're doing something with negative intentions. A lot of times kids just really lack impulse control. You know what you did if you're telling them that they did something wrong. And they're like, I genuinely thought that's what you wanted me to do. Or telling them to act their age. Uh, it communicates that you know why they're doing what they're doing. It assumes that your expectations are equally clear to everyone. Sometimes they genuinely don't. I realized last week I was presenting to elementary schoolers, and some of the questions I assume all of the students know. So I ask it, and I don't really want them to raise their hand because I'm just trying to move through. And so I'm like, why? Like, can somebody, like, whose fault was that? And then I want them to shout it out. And then I suddenly switch. And the next question I'm asking them, I do want them to raise their hands. And then I find myself feeling like, ugh. But I'm like, Becca, you're asking them to shout things out and then want them to raise their hands. So I started saying, shout it out, ask the question. Raise your hand and tell me to make those expectations clear. Yeah, because it can be a missed opportunity to clarify expectations and empower peer leadership. Sometimes they just don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So they're just doing what feels natural, which to them a lot of the time is chaos. I'm going to take a pause to catch up in the chat. This is also, yeah, Kiki and I have toddlers around the same age, and we've bonded over just the chaos of toddler life. At the end of a very long day of elementary presentations, I once told a group of rowdy fifth graders to act like adults, and they were like, "We're 10 years old." Really puts us in our place. And up next, expecting perfection. It can be really frustrating for a lot of reasons, but maybe you've had a really smooth day of presentations, or usually this presentation goes really well, and then you're in a classroom and you're like, what about my formula is not working? This is crazy. So expecting perfection. If you had been listening, you would know what to do. That's why it's important to listen. Ooh, that one's really easy to lean on. But perfection is not a reasonable expectation for people of any age, but effort is. It's good for them to try. It assumes you know the reason a student isn't following instructions, and it may cause them to further disengage. And it's a missed opportunity to foster peer leadership and collaboration. A lot of times, if you invite folks or if you create a space where everybody has a say, then you might see peers holding each other accountable, which a lot of times is much more effective than us telling them to stop talking for the 90th time. Gosh, there was something I was going to add, causing them to further disengage. Oh, something I also think about uh, in a presentation that I do talking about stereotypes is I'll come in and I'll ask them, what do they think people say when they hear that I work in schools with middle and high schoolers specifically? And they'll tell me all these things like, what do you think people assume about middle and high schoolers? That they're disrespectful to adults, that they don't pay attention, that they don't care, that they're not smart enough to talk about this stuff. And then I ask them, how would I behave if I believed that about all of you? And they'll say, oh, you would probably be really strict. You would be angry with us. You wouldn't like, you would yell at us, raise your voice, or you would just be really serious. And then I say, okay. And if I came in here and I seemed like I was assuming all these negative things about you, how would you behave towards me? And they're like, well, I'd be pretty disrespectful. So sometimes recognizing that we can create kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy if we're being really hard on someone for not being perfect, that might make them be like, well, I guess if you don't think I can pay attention well enough, then I'm going to be even more out of the box. Uh, I'm going to read in the chat from Maggie. Going back to the wanting the kids to feel comfortable to ask the uncomfortable questions or awkward but genuinely curious ones. That's why we're there to educate about a topic that usually isn't otherwise talked about. What's your advice when you go to school and have the classroom teacher or the counselor at that school shutting kids down from asking inappropriate questions? That's a really good question. I don't find them inappropriate. I think it's great for the kids to be curious and ask questions, get clarification. I've had several moments during a presentation where a kid is shut down by the teacher or counselor. That is a great, Randy and Kiki, could you like put a pin in that? I want to make sure we talk about that as we go through
Yes,
problem
and
solving.
I'm writing a note in the chat about it too. And then we can come
Outstanding.
back to it as a group as well.
Perfect. Yeah. If a kid asks a question to what we were supposed to be doing, I just ask the class to raise their hand and have a classmate who is listening tell them. That way I'm not personally upset this one kid wasn't listening. That can also serve as a reminder that's like, okay, I'm not crazy. I did tell them what to do. And then you can see a peer modeling, which is really powerful. Can jump to the next slide. Making students the problem. This one, what is wrong with you guys? I don't want to reflect too hard on how often I've probably said that. What's the problem today? You need to calm down, especially if it's a space that you're in a lot. I think it's easiest to do this if it's a group of students you're seeing regularly. No one likes being told to calm down. It's an unfortunate reality, and it overlooks environmental challenges or the impacts of trauma that may be impacting student behavior. I know one time I was having a conversation with middle schoolers about violence in their middle school, and they were all bouncing off the walls, interrupting each other. And when I dug a little bit, I learned there had been a fight in the hallway like immediately before our conversation. If I had just witnessed two of my peers, like if I was in the office and two of my peers had gotten into a shouting match right outside my office and tried to have a serious meeting afterwards, I probably wouldn't be able to focus either. Um, okay, I saw Kiki adding a response there. Favoritism, which is difficult if you have a kid that is raising their hand every time, has great thoughts. Maybe they just taught you something and you want to be like, wow, you're a hero. Uh, a quote that I and Kiki have leaned on is the children who need love the most will always ask for it in the most unloving ways. Just like somebody was talking about having a student that's shouting out or talking over other students or really disruptive, they might be a survivor, which was definitely a theme of some of the stuff that we'll talk about. Because, yeah, a lot of times they're having a really hard time. I know a reframe from infancy to adulthood is they're not trying to give you a hard time, they're having a hard time. Recognizing that can really help depersonalize a lot of things. Because I think a lot of these things really come down to us taking things personally when it's really not personal, it's something going on with the student. So, demonstrating preference for certain students or behaviors, often the ones that are like you, you're like, I see you. We have the same haircut. I like those pants. That reminds me of the pants I wore in the Y2K years. And it's also a missed opportunity to engage and connect with students who may need it the most. Yeah, because sexual abuse and assault and unhealthy relationships impact students that look all different kinds of ways. So, it's important that we make space for all of them. Sometimes we might assume the kid that seems to be like popular or is like spouting views that you might find, ooh, uh, recognizing that that might be a shield that they're using to protect against other things going on in their life. Or maybe you're bringing a whole new perspective to the classroom that they haven't heard before. Punishing the entire class, which is challenging if the behavior is like really disruptive and out of control. Uh, we always talk about when it comes to terminating a presentation, if it just feels like you're spinning your wheels and you can't get things back together, it's probably not productive to keep trying to plow through. But also, we want to avoid punishing the entire class. It undermines the shared value of respect and dignity, breeds resentment rather than compassion for peers, and it sacrifices learning opportunities for everyone. I know another tip I had gotten at one point was um, a student that was being like a class clown during conversations. A colleague told me, like, pull that student aside and say, hey, I can tell that your peers really pay attention to the things that you say and do. And you've got a lot of power in setting the tone in this group. So I want to see if you can just like level it up a little bit. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, psh, this is a middle schooler. I don't think that kid gives a shoot what I want. But it worked like a charm. So having those opportunities to not be calling the student out in front of everyone, but talking to them one-on-one in a way like you can give yourself some time to bring yourself down and have that conversation one-on-one with a student instead of like trying to teach them a lesson in front of the whole class shows that you see them as a human. You're not going out of your way to embarrass them or scold them. You just want to make sure that they're getting what they need and that the classroom is getting what they need. Um, yes. Okay, I read through those. Well, public shaming or reprimanding. It undermines connection and respect. It erodes the opportunity to connect with students who may benefit the most. And that makes me think of when we think about impulse control, a lot of times it's easy for me to be like, oh my gosh, like just like think for a second before you do things. But I feel like I could say that same thing to myself if I have a student who's shouting out and I instantly am like, stop, please, like saying something in front of the whole group. It embarrasses them. It's probably going to make them not talk at all. There's that reinforcing of a stereotype. It just is a vicious cycle. Um, yeah. And that student might really need the support and help. And if we dismiss them right off the bat, it makes it hard for them to engage, and we're probably digging ourselves in a bit of a hole. Preconceived ideas. So sometimes, I don't know if other folks have had this happen. When you go into a particular class, before you go in, the counselor will be like, look out. This class is crazy. A lot of times I'm like, please don't tell me that. I don't want to have an idea that the class is crazy. And if they say that, usually I'm like, okay, it's crazy for the counselor. The counselor and I are different people. This will be fine. But sometimes we may go into a particular school or classroom or age group, maybe that we haven't worked with a ton or that we're not as comfortable with. We don't have as much personal relationship with the school. And we might have ideas about how the students or the staff are going to be reacting to the things that we talk about. But that is reinforcing our bias and it changes the way we approach developmentally appropriate behaviors. I know there's been so many studies done on how young Black students are punished for behaviors that their white peers are not punished for. So if you ever are noticing yourself, that's why I think it's good for us to reflect on what are the behaviors that bother us the most, and thinking about like, okay, what is a time that a student really riled me up, and think about like multiple situations and recognize if there's similarities between those situations and kind of unpack what that might be. Because we might not like unconscious bias is just that, it's unconscious. So it's good for us to be thinking about, like, okay, how might I be perceiving this child as if they should be behaving better? Or why might I be harder on that child than on another child? And again, it often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think
Okay.
this is where I hand it over to Kiki. So maybe we stop and talk about that. Thought about
Yes.
uncomfortable
So,
questions.
yes, great idea. Okay, so Maggie asked a great question in the chat. I think Becca read it out. The gist of the question was, you're in the classroom, you love answering questions from the students, and you are trying to create a space where they can ask those questions. But maybe there's a teacher or a counselor who is uncomfortable with those conversations. And so they are saying, ooh, that's not an appropriate question. And they're kind of shutting down the conversation. So Maggie kind of posed a question, how do you navigate this? And I would love to hear other folks' thoughts too. I had, as you can tell, I am not a concise person. I had like a three-part answer. The first one is, if you've already heard that teacher or counselor do that before, when you are walking to the next class or talking to them in the office or whenever you have a private moment with them, you can let them know directly, hey, I heard you say that what so and so asked was not appropriate. I just want to let you know I'm totally comfortable with with answering any of those questions. And if there's anything that I don't think is appropriate, I'm happy to say that myself. They might be uncomfortable with it. They might think that they're kind of helping you or protecting you. So you can let them know, oh, I got it. Don't worry about me. In a super friendly, way where you're like, you're just looking out for me because you're such a great partner, but let me go ahead and just let you know. The other thing I'm thinking of, if it happens in the moment, you haven't had the chance to talk to this adult yet, um, you can let the student know, oh, that is a really good question. And this is the exact place where you can ask that. I'm the exact person that you can ask that question to because they might not have anyone else they can ask that question to. And this other adult, right, is kind of reinforcing that's not appropriate. So letting them know, hey, when I'm here, I'm the person you can absolutely talk to about this. Um, Hopefully it also lets that other adult know, like, oh, okay, I can kind of step back a little bit. I'm uncomfortable with this, but Maggie isn't, or the presenter isn't, right? Um, I also think that if you have, I know a lot of times we are pressed for time, right? They're like, we are pausing the movie for you to come in, or or we're going to lunch in 20 minutes or whatever it is. So I don't want to take away from the amount of time that folks have to talk about this really important content. But if you can take even a minute at the beginning of your presentation, introduce yourself, this is what we're going to talk about. And I just want to say, while we're having this conversation, you can ask the questions that maybe you haven't gotten the chance to ask in other places, and that is okay. Or if you need to ask me a question individually after, we can chat in the hallway for a minute before you go to lunch or whatever that looks like, right? So normalizing, and maybe that gets out in front of like that uncomfortable teacher who's like, ah, we shouldn't talk about this, and letting them know I'm okay with that. I can set my own limits if I need to. I'm actually really good at that because this is my job.
The another thing I was thinking is like in terms of why the teacher or counselor might be doing that is I think sometimes they think like, oh, I don't want you to think I have bad students or that my students are inappropriate. Or so I also normalized for the teacher, like, that's a great question. Somebody actually asked me that last week. Like normalizing kids asking particular questions, because sometimes a teacher is like, that is so off the wall. I would have no idea how to answer. And saying, like, hey, that's a really good question. And people wonder that a lot. Being able to reflect that back can also help kind of assuage the teacher or counselor's fears that you're going to walk away and be like, those MO-NACA middle schoolers are crazy. So you can normalize that that's like normal behavior that they're doing and saying. And I see Brittany in the chat too talking about those personal disclosures coming up. I know something with younger grades that I do in Chelsea, whoa, Kiki, you can,
My alter ego
oh, because I was thinking chime in. Um, but I was, uh, what was I thinking?
with younger
Oh, with
grades.
them, yeah, with younger grades when they go to start disclosing or something. So if they raise their hand, I say, like, is this a question or a story? Remember, a question, something that you're wondering. Sometimes they're like, yeah, I'm wondering it. And then they're like, last week, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, that was not a question. I can say, I see that you might have like something that you want to share. I usually don't make it clear to the whole class that I recognize this child is about to disclose. A lot of times what I say is like, I really want to hear what you're saying, but I want us to keep like, we only have so much time. I can chat with you at the end of the presentation. I'll be sure to come stop by. So, making sure to say, I see you. It seems like there's something that you want to talk about. That's something we can talk about later. I know sometimes at my job, we also have like a counseling team. And so sometimes kids will be like, I went to MOCSA, and they don't realize that they're disclosing to the whole class. And I don't think their classmates realize they're disclosing, but I do. So, if you can catch it, I know I also like one of the lines from Stewards of Children is like, this is not a time for personal disclosures, not because those stories aren't important, but because they're really important. I don't want to have to cut anyone off, and I want us to focus on what we're trying to learn today. Thank you for sharing, like trying to move it on. Yeah,
Yes.
questions is something that you're wondering. Again, it doesn't always work. Sometimes they're like, I'm wondering about the fire truck I saw last week.
Yeah.
I think you would think is cool.
Yes. And I think that it totally depends on the age group, right? If you're talking to kindergarten, as soon as one person says anything, they all are going to immediately think, oh, I have a dog, or I saw a dog, or I thought about a dog. Like they're all their hands are going to go up. And so you kind of have to give that, like, is this a question? Is this something that you're wondering, or is this a story? And so something that I also tell them is like, I know you guys all have really important stories. Can you do me a favor and hold on to it? And again, this is for little kids, and put it in your pocket so that you don't forget to tell me later. And sometimes they go, oh yeah, and they like are really excited about, or they're like, I don't have a pocket. And I'm like, okay, well, this became a whole other thing. Um, but I think um but I think we yes, I think there are ways that you can get really creative. If you're working with younger kids, you might use like kind of those silly things like that. Or if if their class does like put a bubble in your mouth, or quiet giraffe, or I can't remember what it is. You can use those tools. A lot of those are really, yeah, that's a really good question, is mine too. Um, uh, if it's a little bit older, like if they're maybe like second grade or older, can say like, it sounds like you have something important that you want to talk about. Let's make sure that after we're done with the presentation, me and you can talk, or me and you and the counselor or whoever can talk for a minute in the hallway, or in, counselor's office or something like that. Um, Okay, cool. These are such good questions. And every good question that comes in here, I'm like, maybe this should have been 2 hours instead of 90 minutes because we have so much to talk about. Um, and that being said, I'm trying to keep my eyes on the time so that we can cover everything that we need to, because I want to share now, get into these connection building um, redirects that we might be able to offer. And then after that, you guys are going to get the opportunity in small groups and breakout rooms to kind of work through some of these scenarios that you run into all the time. Practice some of these things in real time before we wrap up. Okay. So, one of the things that one of my favorite keys, I think that as adults, we throw the word respect around a lot. And like a lot of the words that we use as adults, kids don't always know what that means. So I think when we want to talk about respecting each other or being respectful in class, it's really important to define what that looks like in this situation, right? So don't assume that my definition is the same as theirs, right? A lot of the time they might hear that's at home or in other settings, right? Share what that means to you, ask them what it looks like to them, focus on observable behavior. Because a lot of times they'll say, well, we need to respect each other. Okay, well, what does that look like? Does that mean when I'm talking, you're waiting until I'm done? Right? Does that mean that you are supporting me when I share something? What does that look like? So saying things like, to me, respect means not talking over someone and letting them say what they think, right? To me, respect means not throwing your marker at me, right? Whatever it is, depending on the group, obviously. But naming that and asking them to name that too. Um, be clear about the agenda for your time with them, even if it's a short amount of time, so that they know what to expect from your time together. Describe when they'll have the opportunity to share, because a lot of the time when they're talking at a turn, it's because they don't know if they're going to get to share, or they have a lot of ideas that they want to offer to the group. They want to be heard, like right, like someone said, oops, like someone said in the chat earlier. Um, it can also be helpful to name transitions ahead of time, right? Some students have a hard time with transitions, especially younger kids or kids who are neurodivergent. So letting them know, hey, we're going to do this, and then we're going to switch and do this, right? I'm going to start with a presentation for a few minutes, and then we're going to get into small groups and talk about X, Y, and Z. Or then we're going to play a game, right? Before we go to lunch or whatever that your time with them looks like. Just letting them know what to expect ahead of time can kind of smooth some of those bumps. Reinforcing positive behaviors. There is actual research that shows that adults significantly overestimate how much praise we give to kids compared to how much correction we give to kids. We are very generous with ourselves. We think that we are praising kids left and right, when really we're probably correcting them a lot more than we are offering positive feedback. So err on the side of being too nice. Hey, great question. Thanks so much for raising your hand. Like even these little things, those are those connection opportunities, especially for kids who maybe really want that or need that connection. You can thank the group publicly. Wow, you guys all got back in your seats so quickly and quietly. I appreciate you. And now we have so much time to do our next activity. And if you have one-on-one or you have individual praise to give, especially when you're working with like older elementary and middle school, you want to deliver that individually because it can feel embarrassing, right? To be like the one, especially if it's like the one who got good feedback from the teacher, like, oh, are you trying to be a teacher's pet? We don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable, but for doing the right thing. So it can be helpful to name it for them specific and be specific, right? And doing it individually can be helpful too. Examining our own biases. Becca mentioned this earlier, but I think it's really important, especially when we are um, going into classrooms and schools that are full of children who are coming from different backgrounds, to be really reflective about our own biases, right? So again, there is research, there's literature that shows that educators, people of all races, often disproportionately notice and correct misbehavior of students of color, while some of it excusing those same behaviors, um, either in white students or students that we identify more with, right? and identify more with could be like, they're quiet. I was quiet when I was a kid. So even if they're not on task, right? I was shy too. So that makes me think of me, right? Check in with yourself, reflect on your reactions to student behavior. I know that's a big ask. That's an important job for all of us to do as educators who are working with children. Refocus the energy. This is one of my favorites. When I was in the classroom a lot, this was one of my favorite things to do. When you have kids who have a ton of energy, and like Becca was saying, they are influential, right? They are going to make or break whether everyone else gets off task. Use that as a lever to get things done, right? Give them a job. This was my absolute favorite thing to do, especially in programs that were like recurring. Um, I had kids who like I would walk in and they'd be like, you know, you're my assistant today, right? Because you cannot sit in your at your table at all. And either you're going to be at the front of the board or you're going to be in the hallway doing TikTok dances, and that's not constructive for anybody, right? Um, Provide multiple opportunities to engage. So think about different learning styles and needs. Give verbal instructions and written instructions, especially obviously if it's kindergarten, we're not going to expect them to read written instructions on the board necessarily, but for older students, especially, give them verbal and written. Give short steps. Don't say, we're going to do this, this, and this, and this now, and then you're going to do that, that, and that. One thing at a time. First, go find a new partner. Then I'll tell you what we're going to do. Create opportunities for movement. And something that I think can be a game changer, especially for some of those quieter students or students who might not feel comfortable asking those questions in front of everyone, is offering opportunities to contribute in different ways, right? I'm going to give everyone a slip of paper and you write down your answer, or a sticky note, or if you have technology, do a Kahoot, right? Or a poll or something like that, to create opportunities where students don't have to raise their hand and say the words out of their mouth because they probably have an idea or a question to share. They might not feel comfortable saying it in front of everyone. All right. Quiet fidget toys are your friends. Pipe cleaners are your friend. They are cheap, they do not make noise, and if they get destroyed, it is not the end of the world, right? Bring fidgets with you if you can. Make them available to everyone so students don't feel awkward seeking them out, right? Put them on the tables if you can, as long as the teacher or the school is comfortable with it. Um, Avoid anything that makes noise. I will say that from personal experience. I remember I did a presentation at like a youth leadership conference, and it was high school students from all over the area, hundreds of kids. They were awesome. They were youth leaders, they were rock stars. They all got in a little goodie bag at the beginning of the day where they had one of those pens. You guys remember those pens from like the 90s that had like five different colors around them? And so the entire time that they were presenting, they were all clicking like, and I had to tell them at one point I had to stop. And at one point, this is probably 3 minutes in, I was like, I need everyone to take their pen and put it on the floor because I can't hear myself think. So be careful with the fidgets that you choose. Some of them are annoying and that is not going to be helpful. Okay, so we are going to do one quick little scenario together, and then we're going to get into breakout rooms, and you guys are going to get the chance to work through some scenarios on your own. So, Becca, take it away.
Perfect. All right, so we've got scenarios for all of those different disruptive behaviors that we named earlier. So we're going to have you go into breakout rooms and pick a scenario or two, whatever time allows for you to discuss as a group, but just running through one together. So inappropriate comments, elementary, because what it looks like in elementary school for an inappropriate comment to be said is a lot different than a high school. So you are presenting to an elementary school class about body safety. During a video that describes the difference between safe and unsafe touches, a student is loudly saying things like, yuck, that's nasty. I don't want to talk about this. It's gross. So the three questions we'll have you consider. Ultimately, we want to think about how can you address or redirect the disruptive behavior in a constructive connection building way. But as we get to that, considering what need might the student be expressing or addressing. So feel free to unmute or drop in the chat. What kind of need might this student making the comment about it being nasty? What might they be expressing? What might be going on for them?
That they've been taught that it's just a very like taboo thing not to don't talk about it. We're
Yeah,
not gonna talk about it.
sure. Yeah, because
I
maybe,
actually had a student like just last week during a presentation, first grade, start touching herself in that area down there, and she's like, "Oh, gross!" And I said, "No, no, no. It's why we're here. We're talking about it. It's okay."
yeah, yeah, totally.
Absolutely. I saw Sherry in the chat wrote embarrassment. Oh, and Lindsay
Yeah.
wrote embarrassment also.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if the rest of you remember a Birds and the Bees talk when you were like, Mom, Dad, stop! But you're also like, but also, what was that? Um, yeah, so they might be feeling embarrassed. I know something that we've talked about a little bit up until this point is the idea that students that are being disruptive might actually be the students that have experienced something.
Mm.
So when we talk about that, think about that EATS acronym. They may be uncomfortable with the topic, or they may be wanting attention. So they want their peers to think they're funny, not to think they could be a victim. You know, a lot of times, anyone of any age who's experienced this is afraid that people can sense something different about them. So maybe they're like, I know people might know that this happened to me, but I'm gonna like try to have them look over there instead. Needs they might be communicating. So we've got like the need is actually that they want to know more about it. Uh, but also that they may have been impacted by abuse or the behavior being discussed. And then thinking about addressing or redirecting the disruptive behavior in a constructive connection building way. Normalize that the conversation can make this uncomfortable. Like, yeah, this may be something you haven't talked about in the classroom before. That makes sense. It could feel uncomfortable. But also naming whether you're really speaking directly to that child or to the statistically other survivors that are in the room, saying, we don't want to make anyone who's experienced these behaviors feel bad about themselves or think that they're gross. Because unfortunately, it's something that happens, and I don't want us to be, I don't want us to be making our peers feel bad. So just naming that for the room. And then a lot of times, yeah, you might notice that same student's responses later on give you a heads up that maybe that is something that they've experienced. Um, yeah,
Absolutely.
with the swimming question, Angela,
Mhm.
totally. So we, Kelsey or Kiki is going to drop
Mhm.
in the chat a PDF listing all the scenarios. And we'll send folks to breakout rooms. We'll have the breakout rooms end at 10:13, an
Mhm.
odd time, but we're trying to be strategic.
Sorry, give me 1 second. Please, sorry, my computer, doesn't want to cooperate. Okay. All right, our scenarios are in the chat. Those will stay in there. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second.
I don't see the scenarios in the chat. Do other people?
Oh, they are loading, I think.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Lindsay.
All right, sorry, they are loading because I guess my computer is going slow. Um, okay, I don't want to throw you guys in the breakouts until they're there,
That's in
so I
there.
know you
Then
can
they just
click
be in
on
the
them.
breakouts twiddling their thumbs.
Just hanging out. Okay, sorry, I did not expect it to take so long.
It is okay.
Here's what I'm gonna do. Since it's taking a lot, I'm gonna just give me 1 second, you guys. I'm gonna drop a link to that same document in there so that we can look at it that way and we don't have to worry about whether or not this PDF is loaded.
And we were also having a great discussion about talking to kids about boys and girls having different private parts in the chat. And
Hmm.
while you all are in breakout rooms, Kiki and I will chat about it and we'll address that too when we get back because we had good input from Angela. I feel like somebody else was chiming in too.
Yeah. Okay. All right, you guys. Sorry about that. This is going slow. This is a link to the scenario document. I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. We're going to hang out in there for just a couple of minutes. Um, Sorry for eating up your time, but I just wanted to make sure that those were there before we get in there. You should be able to open that link and look at the document. Feel free to start with any of those scenarios. We're going to come back and hit a couple of them together. All right.
I'm gonna
And
pause
here we
the
go.
recording. It's gonna make a little announcement. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up.
That's true. Okay, cool. Thanks for doing the recording, Randy.
No problem.
It's also kind of funny that okay, coming back.
Welcome back, everybody. I know that was a quick visit to the breakout rooms. So thanks for being flexible with us. All right. All right. I think the rooms close in like 15 seconds. So we'll get the rest of our folks back. Here they come. All right. Welcome back, everybody. With our last few minutes, we are going to talk a little bit about a couple of these scenarios. After this training, you're also going to get a handout that has all of the scenarios from that document, and it has some suggested ideas for responding. Yeah, great question. And Becca asked in the chat, is there a particular scenario anyone wants to address to start with?
I think we've got them in alphabetical order.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so we can go ahead and start with arguing. I know side conversations was one of the ones that I remember standing out.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, you're presenting to an eighth grade class about healthy and unhealthy relationships. When asking for examples, two students start arguing about whether or not a celebrity couple's relationship is healthy. The argument gets heated, and other students start taking sides. So this is maybe even just like arguing amongst peers. You might have your own opinion about the celebrity couple. So what is a way that we could connect, we could redirect or address the behavior in a, why am I struggling so hard to say this phrase? Constructive connection building way. Um, what did folks think about for that one? And maybe people didn't do that one, which is also okay.
Yeah, feel free to write in the chat or come off of mute and share.
Maybe you can jump to the next slide and I can start reading through the stuff that we've got and folks can chime
Yeah.
in. So we talked about it being about escape or attention. Um, oh, I think this one, I must have put the wrong one in here.
Mm.
Whoopsie poopsies. We got a slide snafu. But so I can actually paste, I've got the script up so I can paste the other one in here.
Sure.
Oh
Whoops. Well,
boy.
then I'll just keep the scenario on the board
Okay.
or on the screen.
So it's not so confusing. So attention, they're feeling compelled to maintain a status or identity. Maybe it's like, oh, that person is a huge fan of that athlete or that music artist. Maybe they don't get along. It's like about other beef they have with that student. Or maybe it's about other outside stressors. So we talked about acknowledging like that people may have different perspectives. It's okay for us to disagree. I love the passion here. But I want us to make sure we're like focusing on what we're trying to figure out today. Like, what about that relationship might be healthy? What could tell us
Mhm.
if a relationship is healthy or not? So moving it to that more neutral topic to keep the conversation moving. So we can jump ahead to fidgeting. So you're presenting to a middle school class during the last class period before they go to lunch. Several students are getting antsy. One student asked to go to the restroom, their locker, and the nurse multiple times. Another student has fallen out of their chair, throwing that in just to underscore the chaos we've got.
This is one of
Uh,
those my students are doing when I'm already overstimulated moments.
Right. Yes. So thinking about the needs there, somebody might be uncomfortable. They might be like, I gotta get to lunch. Like I'm starting to feel triggered. Maybe they've just been sitting a long time. They haven't had a break in a while. So maybe they can smell the French fries or the pizza lunchroom. So maybe they need a break. You can give them a little chance for movement. So let's get up and take a stretch break, or finding a new partner just to like allow them to move around the room in a way that's still moving the conversation forward. But also setting expectations, being like, hey, I see you. I see that you're all antsy to get to lunch. We've got 10 more minutes together. So I promise I'm going to make it as engaging as possible. So like just stick with me, just reminding us like you're all in it together. Um, Next up, we've got inappropriate comments. So this is the high school version. I know we talked a little bit about elementary school. So you're presenting to a group of high school students about consent and sexual assault. And when asking about situations when someone cannot consent, a student is like trying to crack jokes. So saying things like if they're dead, or what if they can't talk? Kiki had actually had this exact scenario. And so she had
So
some,
many times. A lot of
yeah.
kids make this think that they're very original, making the same comment.
Yeah, yeah, the classic jokes. So talking again about that escape or attention, honestly, those are a common theme. They also may not understand the impact their comments or jokes are having on others. I know this is sad to admit now, but when I was in college and I was trained at a rape crisis center, I remember being like, people are assaulted here. Like I thought that was crazy to imagine, even though I absolutely should have known better. So they might not understand that they're talking in a room of people who may have had this happen. So if they don't understand the prevalence, they might not recognize how serious it is and how it could impact people. So we talked about acknowledging any useful information they provide, because sometimes they might be like, if they're asleep, and then you're like, actually, you would think we don't have to say that, but that is something that happens. So yeah, you're right. If someone is incapacitated or unconscious, they would not be able to give consent. Someone who can't speak or communicate in the same way as the others around them could have a hard time giving consent, and people with disabilities are often vulnerable to abuse. Setting those expectations or agreements at the beginning of class about how to engage with it, um, and reminding students of those classroom agreements. So being able to say, like right off the bat, obviously, once a comment has already been made, it may be a little too late for that if you didn't set that tone, but just a note for next time. And then acknowledging that some of the situations might feel simple or obvious, but that people really do hurt others in those ways. I'm getting a time check. Okay.
We're at
Uh,
10:20.
Great. No, not following instructions.
Maybe we'll
So
knock out like two more. Is that cool?
that sounds good. And I'm trying to,
Okay.
yeah, not following instructions. Let's maybe do the side conversations and talking out of turn. I feel like those are a little bit more
Yeah.
nuanced. So you're presenting to a group of middle school students about sexual harassment. A group of students in the back of the classroom are having a side conversation throughout your breakdown of the definition of sexual harassment. So like right off the bat, they're not listening, or you're perceiving maybe that they're not listening. So needs, they might want to escape, might be uncomfortable. They might want attention. Maybe this is the only class that they have with their best friend. They want to chat with that person. They might also have personal experience with the topic, or they genuinely might be like, whoa, is that basically what happened the other day? So and so, like processing something.
Mhm.
So, how can you address a redirect? We can, again, go into that setting expectations or agreements at the beginning of class about one mic and how to engage with sensitive material. When not presenting at the front of the room, check in with an individual student. So maybe there's an opportunity where you do want them to talk to their peers. You could go back and just I feel like sometimes even acknowledging that you see them talking when you're talking can make them like, oh, whoops. So just being like, hey, it seemed like you guys were having a good conversation. Like, is there anything that you want me to know or that you think would be helpful to share with the class? And really saying it from a neutral position, because I think it can be easy to be like, is there something you would like to share with the class? Which probably won't land well. And if you can tell that they're off topic, like by what they're saying, say like, hey, I know this can be uncomfortable, but I really want us all to walk away from this conversation having learned something. Jumping to talking out of turn. So you're presenting to a sixth grade class. The students are engaged in the conversation and asking good questions. One student keeps calling out ideas and answers to your question before you can call on anyone, despite reminding them to raise their hand. And sometimes it's like hard to even give other people an opportunity because they've already said the whole thing, and it's what you imagine other people might be thinking too. So for talking out of turn, again, it might be attention or it might be those sensory needs. Like they don't have the impulse control to like stop and think before raising their hand. Um, they also might really care about the topic and have lots of ideas, like we were talking about with a student who maybe feels unheard in that classroom typically, or this is like a particular passion of theirs and they don't often get on their soapbox, but here you came in to have a soap conversation. Um, you can address or redirect by suggesting another way for them to record ideas. They could jot it down. I'm embarrassed to admit it wasn't until I was in graduate school that I had a professor that said to me, I get the sense that you recognize that you talk a lot and you wish that you didn't, which sounds like a burn, but I was like, yes. And she was what if you wrote those ideas down so you don't lose them? Because I'm a verbal processor and she clocked it. And that has been so helpful for me. Even earlier in our call, there was something I wanted to chime in and I almost just like started blurting it out and I typed it out for myself so I could remember. And then the conversation passed and I was like, actually, Kiki actually addressed that. So you can give them an idea for how they can write down those ideas or give them a job just to make them feel like just to give them an outlet for that energy that they have. So
And
that's
if they're the scribe, they can write down their ideas on the board.
totally
So they're
one,
capturing them and people are seeing them. So they
two
get that
butterflies
like
with one net,
validation. Yeah.
two birds, one scone, as PETA would like us to say. So I know we've only got about 6 minutes left. Is there any other questions people want to talk about? Um, I know we are talking about those, yeah, giving them a task. Can be good to think about like what rules are even reasonable to hand out ahead of time. But having
Yes.
them write on the board, even though sometimes the handwriting is a little illegible, but they do their best. Um, any other scenarios people want to talk about or that they still feel kind of stuck on?
I'm gonna just put this slide up while we're talking and thinking.
Yeah. Or any other ideas that people have that weren't on the slides. I know I powered through them kind of fast.
We had such a rich discussion that's what happens, You're digging into the good stuff and then at the end you kind of have to scurry a little bit.
Yep.
So it's a good problem to have, I think.
Mhm.
Maggie, I am a huge give them a job person. You seem antsy. Pass out these papers. You have a lot to say. Right on the board. I think a lot of the time we can channel that energy in a positive way.
Yeah. Great. So I'll turn it over to Kiki to close us out. And we've also
Sure.
got our contact information. Truly feel free to reach out to both or either of us with questions. We're happy to help people problem solve.
Yes. Thank you all so much for asking these great questions, for sharing your ideas, for engaging so much, especially on a Friday morning. Um, So, a couple of resources that we use when we were pulling these slides together are listed on here. And like I said, after the training, you guys are going to get access to the slides, the recording, and all of these materials. Both of our contact information, like Becca said, is on the screen. We do have a brief evaluation. I just dropped the link in the chat. And I'm going to put a QR code up on the screen in just a second as well. And as a reminder, this is the first of our six session series. Wow, say that 5 times fast. Every other session will alternate between a school-based topic like this one and a community-based topic. So in April, we have a general audience kind of community-based topic around creating cohesive messaging statewide around child sexual abuse prevention. In June and October, we're going to get back into the school-based content. So we're going to pick up actually some of these great questions that folks shared here, especially as it relates to communication and relationship building with school partners, right? This is really focused on the way that we interact with students. In June, we're going to focus on interacting with the adults, the teachers, counselors, and administrators that we interface with at the schools. October, we're going to go back to working with students and tools that we can use to help them take ownership over safer schools. And then again, August and December, we'll look at more general audience topics, navigating challenging questions and conversations, and then community asset mapping. So I am going to here. Okay, this QR code takes you to the same place as that link. The link will also be in the email. If you're like, I don't really want to scan it and do it on my phone right now, or maybe I want some time to think about it. Yes, Maggie, there are absolutely comments on the eval, and there is like a general comments box at the end. So if you have other questions that you weren't able to ask or that you feel like we didn't really get into enough in this session, please feel free to write those in. And we can make sure that they're addressed in a future session, or that we can share a resource in the follow-up email as it relates to those comments and questions. These are great. They're great questions. Y'all are rock stars, and I really hope that we get to see you at future sessions. And similarly, when you're filling out that eval in the comment section, if you have ideas about future topics that you would like addressed in future trainings, please feel free to use that space to make those recommendations and suggestions as well. All right, I am going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen.